For the women of Afghanistan, worse was to come, as the Taliban instigated what could be described as gender apartheid. Girls' schools all over the country were immediately shut down, and professional women of any kind were barred from continuing to work. Even women's most basic human rights were curtailed, as the female population now found itself effectively under house arrest, unable to leave their homes without the accompaniments of male family members. Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today we are discussing episode 4, The Modern History of Afghanistan, the origins and ideology of the Taliban, and their rise, fall, and return to power. So, let's get going. Restrictions on women extended to medical professions as well, which led to serious health issues for women during the early days of the Taliban regime. For a male doctor could not examine a female patient, but at the same time, women were not allowed to train or practice in the medical profession. As such, women under the Taliban suffered from several medical conditions that were often life-threatening or life-altering that men could get treatment for. As with many populations throughout history who find themselves oppressed, many women under the Taliban were forced to go underground in an effort to get what they needed. Women trained in the most rudimentary of medical practices offered their services to their fellow women whenever they could, and often with covert help from friends and family overseas or some aid organizations. Furthermore, secret schools were set up to teach girls to read and write, but the fear of discovery was always present, and the penalty for engaging in such activities was severe. For some women, it was too much, and fearing the spiritual consequences of suicide within their faith, they would attempt to flee to the Northern Alliance or one of Afghanistan's neighboring countries. They knew how dangerous this was, for as well as the fear of discovery and arrest, there was the fear of being killed by bandits, or simply not surviving the grueling journey across inhospitable terrain. If they were arrested by the Taliban attempting such an escape, then they were often publicly stoned on the charge of committing adultery against their husbands. Many women still risked it, however, for they knew that regardless of whether they made it to freedom or were killed in the process, at least the pain would be over. By the dawn of the 21st century, improvements in the miniaturization of camera technology meant that humanitarian agencies and anti-Taliban factions in Afghanistan were finally able to show the world what was happening in the country. Footage of women being driven in the back of pickup trucks and taken to sports arenas where they were publicly beaten, flogged, and in many cases shot dead in front of jeering crowds, including children, shocked the world. But aside from token sanctions, nothing was done about it. In terms of the Western media's attention, and as a result, the Western people's own interests, the situation in Chechnya, where Russian forces were engaged in a brutal and bloody campaign to hold on to the breakaway republic, and the UN and NATO's efforts to clamp down on the ethnic cleansing taking place in the former Yugoslavia overshadowed events in Afghanistan. Western intelligence services, on the other hand, were paying much closer attention to Afghanistan than most of their own people did. In the mid-1990s, Afghanistan had become something of a beacon of hope to extremist terrorist groups. It served as a symbol of what they saw as the faithful's first great victory over the Western non-believers they sought to destroy after the defeat of the Soviet Army. Now, with the Taliban largely in control, Afghanistan could be molded into the modern radical religious state and provide a base for what they could train their fighters to wage jihad against, the ultimate prize. The United States and Israel, while numerous small groups had links with the Taliban or operated in Afghanistan. Without a doubt, the most significant was the Al-Qaeda terrorist network. The organization began to move much of its base of operations up to continental Africa, where they were increasingly being clamped down upon by the U.S. network back to Afghanistan, and where American influence was significantly weaker. There they could plot, prepare, and train for upcoming attacks against the West under the hospitality of the Taliban. What made Al-Qaeda a greater threat than most jihadist groups of the period was just how intricately woven the organization was in the global jihad campaign. While Al-Qaeda was relocating to Afghanistan, U.S. intelligence made contact with an Al-Qaeda operative who wished to leave the organization and trade information for American protection. Under questioning, this defector explained that its leader, Osama bin Laden, was now the head of a multifaceted global jihadist organization with a board of directors made up of leaders of various groups, either allied to Al-Qaeda or having simply been absorbed by it. Western intelligence has been monitoring their one-time ally against the Soviets since 1989, including his return to Saudi Arabia, where he received a hero's welcome. However, his relationship with his homeland soon turned sour. In the wake of Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait in August of that year, and the Iraqi armies threatening the Saudi kingdom, bin Laden approached the Saudi royal family and offered to use his network of radical religious fighters to help defend Saudi Arabia. However, King Fahd did something that was totally unthinkable to bin Laden. He asked the United States and their Western allies for help. Bin Laden was outraged and left Saudi Arabia for Sudan, where he began consolidating his power and using his wealth to promote and support jihad against the non-believers and any government or agency who worked with them. In 1993, he publicly praised an attack on the World Trade Center in New York City after a truck laden with explosives was parked in the basement car park beneath the Twin Towers, the intention being to topple the immense buildings over with the blast. While the attack failed in this regard, 6 people were killed and over 1,000 injured. But more than that, it shook the American people to the core, as the attack at the time was the worst terrorist attack on U.S. soil in history. Bin Laden would not forget these facts. By the time bin Laden arrived in Afghanistan in 1996, he had lost his Saudi citizenship for his support of terrorism. On assessing bin Laden's direct influence on the wave of terrorism in the 1990s, Western intelligence analysts believed he was primarily functioning the role of financier and promoter, but the defector to the West rebuffed this notion in 1996, stating he was actively involved in the direct plotting and preparation of attacks. Bin Laden wasted no time in continuing his war against the West. After reaching Afghanistan and in August of 1996, the London-based Arabic newspaper posted a 26-page document written by bin Laden entitled The Declaration of War Against the Americans Occupying the Land of the Two Holy Places. This was al-Qaeda's passing of jihad law against the U.S. and its allies, a fatwa. In the fatwa, he outlined the crimes he accused the non-believers of committing against Muslims around the world, stating, quote, "It should not be hidden from you that the people of Islam have suffered from aggression, iniquity, and injustice imposed upon them by the Zionist Crusaders Alliance and their collaborators to the extent that the Muslim blood became the cheapest and their wealth as loot in the hands of the enemies. Their blood was spilled in Palestine and Iraq. All of this, and the world watch and hear, and not only didn't respond to these atrocities, but also with a clear conspiracy between the U.S. and its allies, and under the cover of the iniquitous United Nations, the disposed people were even prevented from obtaining arms to defend themselves." With the fatwa issued, bin Laden and al-Qaeda continued the recruitment and training of jihadists in Afghanistan. Yet, while al-Qaeda frequently made mention of their links to Mullah Omar's government claiming to function in a subservient manner to the government in Kabul after 1996, it seems that this was seldom the case. Even with al-Qaeda aiding the Taliban in their cultural reformation of the country and the fighting against the Northern Alliance, the arrival of bin Laden in his newly formed country seemed to be causing Omar a great deal of trouble, not only from the international community, but from within his own government, who questioned the wisdom of hosting a terrorist organization actively at war with the West, and the kind of attention that would bring when they were otherwise generally turning a blind eye to the Taliban. Perhaps, recognizing the forces trying to influence Omar against him, and remembering his embarrassing withdrawal from Sudan, bin Laden worked to keep Omar sweet whenever the opportunity presented itself. In 1997, bin Laden used his organization's wealth and manpower to instigate projects such as building roads, schools, mosques, a dam, and even a large house for Omar's family in Kandahar province. Bin Laden delegated these projects to his subordinates, but through either mismanagement or lack of funds, which instead went to fund the global jihad, many of these proved to be empty promises and were seldom fulfilled, which antagonized the local Afghan population, who saw many of these foreigners coming into their province and living relatively lavish lifestyles compared to their abject poverty. This resentment spread to many leaders in the Taliban, whose opposition was being charmed away by bin Laden and his wealth. And slowly, this resulted in many within the Taliban upper hierarchy being bought around to supporting al-Qaeda's international ambitions. On February 23, 1998, bin Laden met with 4 other key terrorist organizations, where they declared a second fatwa that authorized terrorists to kill indiscriminately Americans and Israelis. The 5 signatures identified themselves as the World Religious Front for Jihad Against Jews and Crusaders, and declared the fatwa in opposition of what they saw as an ongoing American military occupation of Saudi Arabia and Iraq, and American support for Israel. Despite revoking his citizenship, the government in Saudi was particularly alarmed by what this could mean for its relationship with the United States, and so in June 1998, Prince Al Saud, who at the time was head of the Saudi intelligence, traveled to Afghanistan to meet with Omar. The Saudi prince outlined his country's position on the matter of bin Laden, demanding that either the Taliban expel him and al-Qaeda from their country, or alternatively hand him over to the Saudi authorities, and there would be consequences concerning the relationship between the two countries. To sweeten the offer to Omar, the Saudis provided additional aid to Afghanistan, including 400 new 4x4 pickup trucks, which were used by Taliban forces to move troops and equipment across Afghanistan's harsh terrain. In their fight against the Northern Alliance, Omar initially appeared receptive to the deal, and with Saudi Arabia being one of the few countries to formally recognize his government, he knew he needed them on his side. However, by August 1998, the talks had broken down. Upon learning of Tariqi's demands, bin Laden openly accused him of being an envoy for the Zionist crusaders he and his people were at war with. Meanwhile, in the U.S., the CIA, FBI, and the Pentagon were in the process of exploring plans to kidnap bin Laden in Afghanistan. The prevailing plan concerned hiring local Afghan mercenaries to capture bin Laden and then take him to a prearranged location out in the desert. There, a specifically modified short takeoff and landing version of a C-130 Hercules cargo plane would land and exchange him for money. After bin Laden was indicted to the U.S. on charges of being linked to the attacks on U.S. troops in Somalia in the early 1990s, the plan looked as though it would go ahead. But disagreements between the major players and concern over what to do if something should go wrong, such as the Hercules being shot down, delayed the deployment order until it was finally shelved. To be continued. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments down below. Be safe